The night was still, almost unreal in its quiet, the kind of silence that makes every creak of the house feel louder, sharper, and Clara felt it in her bones as she sat on the worn couch, the soft glow of the lamp beside her casting a warm, golden circle of light that barely reached the corners of the living room, leaving shadows that danced lightly on the walls, teasing her imagination with shapes that almost moved on their own, and she hugged a thin blanket around her shoulders, trying to shake off the chill of the winter air that had crept inside through the slightly open window, the wind rustling the curtains and making the faint sound of branches tapping against the glass like quiet knocks she ignored, thinking it was just the wind playing tricks. But then a different sound reached her ears, a real knock, soft but deliberate, and it made her heart jump, a sudden, sharp pang that made her forget the warmth of the lamp and the comfort of her book, and she froze, listening, straining to hear anything else, but the house returned to its usual quiet, leaving her with the echo of that single knock ringing in her mind like a bell that wouldn't stop, and she hesitated, unsure if she should answer, thinking maybe it was a neighbor or someone who had gotten lost or even some stranger, and the clock ticked loudly beside her, marking each second with a weight that seemed heavier than usual, reminding her that it was nearly midnight, a time when ordinary visitors were rare, and interruptions carried meaning beyond casual necessity, and her mind immediately went to her son, Daniel, who had been unusually restless the past few days, spending hours in his room alone, sometimes talking quietly to himself, sometimes not talking at all, sometimes bursting with sudden energy and excitement and then retreating again into silence, and she wondered if he might have needed her, or if something had happened, something he couldn't handle on his own, because that knock carried a tone that was soft but urgent, a subtle plea she couldn't ignore, and she found herself rising from the couch, feeling the blanket slip from her shoulders as she moved quickly yet cautiously toward the front door, the wooden floor cold beneath her bare feet, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for the doorknob, the warmth of the lamp now replaced by a rising tension that made her heart pound against her chest like it wanted to escape, and she paused just before opening it, taking a deep breath, trying to steady herself, wondering what she would find on the other side, imagining every possibility, the good and the bad, her mind racing through scenarios she could not control, scenarios that made her stomach twist with a mix of anticipation and fear, and then, with one decisive motion, she turned the knob and opened the door, and there he was, Daniel, standing under the pale glow of the porch light, looking different somehow in the moonlight, taller than she remembered from last year, broader, more grown, yet still carrying a fragility that made her mother's heart ache, his eyes wide and glistening as if he had been holding back tears and finally decided he could no longer, his expression a mixture of determination and vulnerability that made her step back slightly, unsure if she should call him in or wait for him to speak, because the moment was heavy with unspoken emotions, and Daniel's voice, when he finally broke the silence, was almost a whisper, barely louder than the wind outside, "Mom, I need to talk," and the words landed like a soft but powerful blow, leaving Clara momentarily speechless, her mind scrambling to catch up, to understand the urgency, the weight behind them, and she nodded slowly, her own voice caught somewhere between her chest and throat, unable to form words immediately, letting him sense her presence, her support, before stepping aside to let him in, watching as he hesitated for a brief moment on the threshold, his hands fidgeting nervously with the edge of his coat, the way he shifted his weight from one foot to another, betraying the storm of emotions he was clearly holding back, and she could feel the tension radiating from him, the quiet pulse of anxiety and expectation that made her chest tighten in response, because mothers felt these things, these invisible threads that connected them to their children, threads that pulled tighter when the night was heavy and hearts were full, and Daniel finally took a small step inside, brushing past her briefly, and the warmth of the house seemed to embrace him, though he didn't sit, didn't relax, instead pacing slowly a few steps into the living room, his eyes darting to the shadows, as if expecting the room itself to respond to his confession, and Clara followed him with her eyes, noting every subtle gesture, the way his hands clenched and unclenched, the way he swallowed hard, the way his lips moved slightly without sound as he rehearsed the words he had been carrying alone, and she could sense the magnitude of what he had come to say, because it wasn't casual, it wasn't trivial, it was something that had been growing quietly in him for weeks, months even, a feeling too strong to ignore, a truth too important to hide, and as he finally turned to face her fully, she noticed the faint quiver in his chin, the slight tension in his jaw, the way his eyes searched hers as if measuring her reaction before he even spoke, and Clara felt a deep surge of love and concern, that instinctive mix of maternal pride and worry that made the air between them feel charged, almost tangible, like it was vibrating with unspoken anticipation, and when Daniel took a deep breath, she felt it ripple through her, as if the night itself had paused to listen, the wind outside holding still, the branches no longer tapping, the world reduced to the two of them in the quiet living room, a mother and her son, on the edge of a moment that would change the course of their relationship, deepen it, stretch it, and leave them both exposed in ways they could not have prepared for. And finally, Daniel spoke, his voice breaking slightly but steadying as he forced himself to continue. "Mom, I've been carrying something I need to tell you," and Clara felt a shiver run down her spine, a combination of fear, curiosity, and love, because she knew in that instant that what he was about to say was more than just words. It was a confession of heart, a revelation of vulnerability, and she realized that this midnight knock was not just a sound but a signal, a turning point, a delicate hinge upon which the night would swing, carrying with it emotions that would cling to them long after the moment passed, and she found herself holding her breath, nodding again, silently urging him to continue, to release the weight he had been carrying alone, because she understood, without needing him to say, that some truths were so heavy they demanded the night, demanded quiet, demanded the intimacy of shared space and time. And as Daniel took another step closer, his hands still trembling, his gaze unwavering, she felt the full force of the motherly bond, the mix of fear, hope, love, and tenderness that made her heart ache and swell at once, and she knew that whatever he was about to reveal would linger in the room with them, in the shadows of the living room, in the faint glow of the lamp, in the soft tick of the clock, marking the passage of time that had brought them to this moment, and she silently promised herself she would meet him with understanding, patience, and an open heart, because the midnight hour had a way of bringing truths to the surface, and she would not let fear or judgment interfere with the delicate honesty her son had finally chosen to offer, and so she stood there, watching him, waiting, feeling the weight of the moment stretch, elongate, a thread that connected past and present, mother and son, fear and relief, all in one fragile, beautiful instant, knowing that in a few words, the night would change, the air would shift, and the bond between them would grow stronger, deeper, richer, because sometimes, the world stopped at midnight to let hearts speak, to let the quiet reveal what days could not, and Clara felt it now, the silent magic of the night, holding her breath with her son, as he prepared to say the words that would echo in her heart far longer than the fleeting knocks that had brought him to the door. And she realized that this simple act of knocking, of crossing the threshold into her home and heart, was more powerful than anything she had expected, more profound than any ordinary conversation, because it carried love, fear, hope, and truth all at once, a blend that made the world pause and made her pulse quicken in anticipation of what he would say next, and she stayed there, quiet, open, patient, holding space for him, for his story, for the tender, emotional confession that was about to unfold, and in that moment, she understood that life, love, and the bonds of family often arrived unexpectedly, knocking softly at midnight, carrying with them the power to leave hearts forever changed. Daniel stepped fully into the warm living room, the soft light casting long shadows around him as he ran a hand through his dark hair, his fingers trembling slightly as if the simple act of moving them betrayed the storm of feelings he had been holding inside, and Clara watched him carefully, sensing the weight of unspoken words pressing down on him like a heavy fog, making the air between them thick with tension, yet there was also a fragility in his posture, a hesitancy that made her heart ache and pulled her closer emotionally even though physically she remained where she was, because she knew this was a moment that mattered, a threshold of honesty and vulnerability that could not be rushed or forced. And Daniel's eyes flicked to hers with a combination of determination and fear, the kind of look that made her chest tighten because she recognized it as the expression of someone ready to bare their soul yet terrified of the reaction that might follow, and he took a deep breath, exhaling slowly as if trying to release the tension that had built up for days, weeks, months even, though it had felt like years to him, and then he began to speak, his voice low and deliberate at first, as if each word needed careful handling. "Mom, I've been holding something for a long time, something I couldn't bring myself to say until now, because I wasn't sure if I could handle the truth of it myself, and I didn't want to burden you, but I can't anymore. I need to tell you what's been happening." And Clara felt a shiver of anticipation, a mixture of anxiety and love, because she understood that when someone spoke like that, it wasn't a casual confession, it was a carefully nurtured admission of vulnerability. The kind that changes relationships and shifts the emotional landscape of the home in subtle, profound ways, and she nodded, softly encouraging him to continue without pressure, her own pulse quickening as she wondered what exactly had caused him to seek her out in the middle of the night, because Daniel rarely asked for her attention like this, and when he did, it was always something important, something that mattered deeply to him, and she felt that she needed to be fully present, fully attuned to every nuance, every breath, every pause that punctuated his words, because these moments, these confessions, were fleeting, delicate, and could be missed if not approached with patience and care. And Daniel's hands began to fidget, tugging at the edge of his sleeve, twisting it, wringing it almost as if the fabric could hold his anxieties in place while he summoned the courage to speak further, and his voice wavered briefly, betraying the emotional weight that he was carrying. And Clara instinctively reached for him, wanting to offer support, but hesitated, giving him the space he clearly needed to navigate his own feelings before physical comfort could be meaningful, because sometimes silence and patience spoke louder than words. And Daniel's eyes glimmered with a strange mixture of fear, hope, and longing, and Clara felt the pull of maternal empathy, understanding that he was standing on the precipice of sharing a part of his life that had been private, sacred even, and that the act of revealing it was both terrifying and necessary for him. And then, finally, he began to describe Emma, the woman who had captured his thoughts and stirred his heart, and as he spoke, his voice gained strength, a tremor of excitement threading through the nervousness, painting vivid pictures of her smile, the way her laughter rang in his ears long after she had left, the way her hair fell in waves that caught the light, the subtle gestures she made that revealed the depth of her character. And Clara listened intently, absorbing every detail as if she could see the woman herself through her son's eyes, feeling a mixture of pride, empathy, and a soft ache because she understood the intensity of first love, the way it could sweep someone off balance, fill them with longing, hope, and sometimes quiet heartbreak. And Daniel continued, revealing moments they had shared, small interactions that had meant the world to him, the way he remembered conversations, the way he noticed little things about her that others might overlook. And Clara felt herself drawn deeper into his world, understanding the magnitude of his emotions, because love, even from someone so young, was powerful and all-encompassing, and the sincerity in his words made her heart swell with both joy and concern, joy for the beauty he was experiencing and concern for the vulnerability he was exposing. And then he paused, swallowing hard, and his eyes met hers, searching for judgment or approval, and Clara could only offer a soft, encouraging nod, letting him know he was safe, that he could continue without fear, because this was his story to tell, and she was here to witness it, not control it. And he took another deep breath, steadying himself, and shared how conflicted he had felt, torn between the excitement of newfound feelings and the fear of losing control, of being misunderstood, of making mistakes that could hurt the one he cared about most. And Clara felt the weight of those words, knowing that every young love carried the same intensity, the same vulnerability, the same potential for heartbreak, and she longed to reassure him, to tell him that feelings were valid, that the path of love was never simple, and that experiencing these emotions, no matter how overwhelming, was part of growing, part of learning, part of becoming fully human. And Daniel's voice cracked slightly as he admitted that he had kept this all bottled up because he didn't know how to explain it, didn't know if she would understand, didn't know if he could trust even himself with the complexity of what he was feeling. And Clara felt her heart clench, because she recognized in him the universal struggle of expressing emotion honestly, of letting someone see the deepest parts of oneself, and she wanted to reach out, to embrace him, but she held back, allowing the moment to breathe, allowing him to find his words, allowing him to navigate the labyrinth of his heart without interference. And then, slowly, Daniel spoke of the fear he had been living with, the fear that this love, so intense, so consuming, might be fleeting, that it might vanish before it could fully exist, that circumstances beyond his control might take it away. And Clara felt the ache of recognition, remembering her own experiences with longing and loss, with beauty that couldn't last forever, and she felt a quiet empathy for him, the bittersweet realization that love, in all its forms, came with both joy and pain, and Daniel's confession deepened as he admitted he wasn't just sharing details. He was seeking guidance, understanding, acceptance, and a safe harbor for the storm inside him, and Clara understood this completely, feeling a rush of protectiveness, of unconditional love, of the need to be present not just as a mother, but as a witness, a supporter, someone who could hold space for the emotional tumult that her son was courageously revealing, and she watched as he shifted nervously, glancing around the room, as if the walls themselves could give him reassurance, as if the familiar furniture, the soft glow of the lamp, and the quiet ticking of the clock could somehow stabilize the emotional surge inside him. And then he returned his gaze to her, and the raw honesty in his eyes left her momentarily breathless, because she could see the layers of fear, excitement, uncertainty, and hope all at once, and she felt a mix of admiration and tenderness, knowing that this moment, though quiet and ordinary on the surface, was extraordinary in its emotional significance, a private turning point in the life of her son and in their relationship. And Daniel's voice rose slightly, no longer trembling but carrying an intensity that spoke of the depth of his feelings, as he explained the moments he had spent thinking of Emma, the nights he had lain awake imagining conversations, the mornings he had woken with thoughts of her lingering like sunlight on his mind, the small gestures he had rehearsed but never delivered, and Clara listened, completely absorbed, feeling the layers of love, of fear, and hope intertwine in a tapestry that only he could tell. And she realized that these midnight conversations, these confessions carried more weight than anything during the day, because they were unguarded, unfiltered, sincere, and raw, and she allowed herself to feel the full impact, the warmth and the ache, the beauty and the tension. And Daniel continued, sharing how he had struggled with feelings of inadequacy, how he feared he might not be enough, how he feared that Emma might not feel the same, and Clara's heart ached for him, because she recognized those insecurities, had faced them herself in her own life, and wanted desperately to reassure him that fear did not diminish the power of what he was feeling, that the courage to love, to hope, to be vulnerable, was in itself an achievement, and that whatever the outcome, the honesty and intensity of these feelings were precious. And Daniel paused again, his chest rising and falling rapidly, as if the act of speaking had exhausted him in a way that words could not convey, and he looked at Clara, eyes wide, and whispered, "I didn't know how to tell you. I was afraid you'd think I was too young, or that I didn't know what I wanted." And Clara stepped closer, softly placing a hand on his shoulder, feeling the tremor in his muscles, the slight tension in his frame, the weight of his emotions pressing outward. And she said gently, almost in a whisper, "Daniel, you are never too young to feel, and I'm always here to listen." And the room seemed to exhale with them, the tension easing slightly, the air becoming less charged, more intimate, more tender, and Daniel allowed himself a small, shaky smile, relief flickering in his eyes, and Clara knew that this moment, this quiet exchange in the middle of the night, was the beginning of a new chapter, one of openness, honesty, trust, and emotional growth. And she understood that while the night was quiet, it carried within it the resonance of feelings too profound to be ignored, the power of love, hope, and vulnerability, and the beauty of connection between a mother and her son. As they stood together in the living room, hearts aligned, emotions shared, the world outside hushed and distant, and Daniel finally sank onto the edge of the couch, still trembling slightly but lighter than before, and Clara remained close, her presence a steady anchor. And she realized that sometimes, the most important conversations happen in the small hours, when the world is asleep, and only hearts are awake, listening, speaking, and understanding. And this night, this confession, this moment of emotional truth, would linger in both their hearts, shaping their bond, deepening their understanding, and leaving an imprint of tenderness, courage, and love that would carry them through the days to come, a quiet testament to the power of honesty, the bravery of vulnerability, and the enduring strength of a mother's love. Daniel sat on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped tightly together, knuckles white, and Clara watched him carefully, sensing the intensity of the emotions that had been building within him for so long, a mixture of hope, longing, fear, and vulnerability that made her heart ache for him even as it swelled with pride at his courage to speak. And he took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling rapidly as if he had been holding his breath for days, weeks, maybe even months, and then began to speak again, his voice low but steady, weaving a tapestry of feelings that Clara could feel reverberating in the room, as he spoke about Emma, the woman who had captured his heart in ways he hadn't expected, the way she smiled, the light in her eyes, the small gestures that revealed her kindness and warmth, and the quiet strength she carried that drew him to her even more with every passing day, and Clara felt a pang in her chest, recognizing the intensity of first love, the way it could consume someone completely, fill them with hope, fear, and longing all at once, and Daniel's words painted vivid pictures of shared moments, stolen glances, conversations that lingered in his mind, small touches that seemed insignificant to the world but monumental to him, and Clara felt herself pulled into his world, experiencing every emotion as if it were her own, remembering the first time she had felt a love so deep it left her breathless. The way it made the ordinary seem extraordinary, the way it could lift and crush all at once, and Daniel continued, describing the longing that had kept him awake at night, the moments he had replayed in his mind, the words he had rehearsed but never spoken, the dreams he had built around her presence, and Clara listened, completely absorbed, feeling the raw honesty and vulnerability in his voice, the trembling courage it took to reveal such intimate emotions, and she wanted to comfort him, to tell him that these feelings were natural, that love, even when uncertain or complicated, was a gift to be cherished, yet she also knew she had to allow him to express himself fully without interruption, to navigate the delicate balance of excitement and fear that had been building inside him, and Daniel's eyes glimmered with tears as he admitted that he had never felt this way before, that he had been terrified of the intensity of his own emotions, unsure if they were right, unsure if they would last, unsure if he could trust himself to understand them, and Clara felt a mixture of empathy and longing for him, because she knew the power of emotions that could overwhelm the mind and heart, the beauty and the ache of feelings that demanded attention, yet carried the risk of heartbreak, and Daniel's words grew more impassioned as he explained that Emma had become the center of his thoughts, that he found himself thinking of her at every turn, imagining conversations, replaying memories, imagining the future with her in ways that made his chest tighten with hope and fear simultaneously, and Clara nodded silently, letting him know he was being heard, that he was not alone, that the love he felt was valid and worthy, because these affirmations, even unspoken, carried weight and relief for someone vulnerable and anxious, and Daniel leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees, voice quivering as he confessed that he was afraid of losing her, afraid that circumstances beyond his control might pull them apart before he had the chance to fully express what he felt, and Clara's heart ached for him, feeling the universality of that fear, knowing the terror of attachment, of caring so deeply that the thought of loss feels unbearable, and she reached out, brushing a hand lightly against his arm, offering warmth and grounding without words, a silent acknowledgement that she understood, that she was there, that he was safe in sharing his emotions with her, and Daniel's voice cracked slightly as he admitted that he felt unprepared for the depth of his own feelings, that he had hidden them not out of shame but out of fear of overwhelming himself or others, and Clara smiled softly, gently reassuring him that emotions were not something to fear, that feeling deeply was not weakness but a sign of humanity and courage, and she watched as the tension in his shoulders eased slightly, the tremor in his hands lessened, and he exhaled, a long, shaky breath, releasing a fraction of the burden he had been carrying alone, yet still holding the gravity of the emotions that remained, and then Daniel's words took a turn, soft but urgent, as he spoke of the longing that had grown unbearable, the way he ached for connection, for understanding, for acknowledgement of the feelings he could not contain within himself, and Clara felt the room fill with the weight of emotion, a tangible tension that made the air feel thick, the space charged, because these were truths that demanded attention, that needed to be honored, that carried the beauty and the pain of love unfiltered, and Daniel's gaze met hers, searching for acceptance, for validation, for a recognition that what he was feeling was real and worthy, and Clara's heart opened wider, offering her unwavering support, her eyes soft with empathy, her presence a safe harbor, as he continued to speak, describing the moments he had spent imagining a future with Emma, the dreams that flickered in his mind, the quiet hopes that he feared might be crushed if not handled carefully, the love that had grown silently but powerfully in the spaces between ordinary days, the way it had settled into him like a second heartbeat, persistent, insistent, impossible to ignore, and Clara felt the raw power of these words, the courage it took to speak them, The vulnerability of revealing a part of oneself that had been hidden and protected for so long, and she realized that this was not just a story of first love, it was a story of growth, of emotional maturity, of a young heart learning to navigate the complexities of connection, longing, and fear, and Daniel's voice softened as he admitted that he was scared, not just of losing Emma but of misunderstanding himself, of making mistakes, of being unworthy of the intensity of what he felt. And Clara's chest ached with empathy, understanding that these fears were natural, universal, and that her presence, her patient listening, was the anchor he needed, the reassurance that he was not alone, and she allowed him to continue, leaning in slightly. Attentive, open, silent but fully present, as Daniel spoke of the bittersweet ache that accompanied love that might be fleeting, the tension between desire and reality, the longing for permanence in a world that often refused it, the hope that even a moment shared could leave a lasting impact, and Clara's heart swelled with tenderness, recognizing the depth of emotion, the courage, the vulnerability, and the beauty of a heart opening so completely, and Daniel's voice rose slightly as he confessed that he could not keep these feelings bottled up any longer, that the act of holding them in had become too heavy, too consuming, that he needed to share them, to speak them aloud, to let someone else witness the intensity of his heart, and Clara nodded, encouraging him without words, offering him the space to reveal everything, knowing that this was a rare, intimate, transformative moment between mother and son, a shared vulnerability that would bond them in ways ordinary conversation could never achieve. And then Daniel spoke of Emma's presence in his thoughts, the way it colored every day, every small interaction, every quiet moment, the way it brought light and shadow, joy and tension, hope and fear, all in the span of a heartbeat. And Clara felt the power of his words resonate within her, understanding that love in any form, even young, uncertain, and fragile, carried a weight that was simultaneously beautiful and heavy, and Daniel's words grew more tender, more urgent, more confessional as he admitted that he feared he would never experience something so intense again, that the fleeting nature of life and love made every emotion precious, every glance monumental, and Clara reached out, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead, offering the comfort of presence, warmth, and empathy, silently telling him that what he felt mattered, that it was valid, that he was not alone in navigating the turbulent waters of love, longing, and fear. And Daniel's eyes glistened with tears, a mixture of relief, release, and lingering anxiety, and he whispered that he had been terrified to say anything, afraid of being judged, misunderstood, or dismissed, but now, speaking the words aloud, he felt a fragile freedom, a small lightness in the chest that had been weighed down for so long, and Clara's own heart ached with the beauty of the moment, the intimacy of shared vulnerability, the power of honesty and courage, because this midnight conversation, born of knocks and hesitations, had grown into a profound connection, a bridge between hearts, a space where love, hope, and fear could coexist safely. And Daniel leaned back slightly, taking in a shuddering breath, the tension easing but not gone, the weight lifted partially but the emotional truth still present, and Clara knew that this was a turning point, a deepening of trust, a moment that would linger in both of them, shaping their understanding, their bond, and the way they related to each other, and she felt a swell of love, pride, and tenderness, realizing that the courage to speak, the willingness to reveal oneself, the honesty of heart, was more valuable than any words of comfort she could offer, and she simply stayed there, present, listening, holding space for him, allowing the emotions to flow, allowing the story of longing, fear, and young love to unfold fully, knowing that this moment, quiet, fragile, intense, would mark the night, their hearts, and their lives in subtle, lasting ways. And Daniel finally exhaled, a long, shivering breath, the weight lifted slightly, his shoulders relaxing a fraction, and Clara felt a sense of quiet triumph, a recognition that love, honesty, and courage had converged in a small living room at midnight, creating a moment that would linger in memory, shaping both mother and son, their understanding, their connection, and their shared journey through the complexities of human emotion, intimacy, and the delicate, beautiful ache of opening one's heart completely to another. Daniel sat back on the couch, his body trembling slightly from the release of long-held tension, his hands loosely resting on his knees as he tried to steady his breathing, and Clara remained close, her presence a steady anchor, her eyes soft and full of empathy, silently reassuring him that he was safe, that he was understood, that the words he had spoken were met not with judgment but with love, and he swallowed hard, glancing at her, and the vulnerability in his gaze made her chest ache, because she could see not just the young man before her, but the weight of all the emotions he had carried in silence, the longing, the fear, the hope, and the tenderness that now filled the quiet space between them. And Daniel began again, his voice low but urgent, "Mom, there's more," and Clara's heart skipped, sensing the gravity in the words, the way they hung in the air like a fragile promise, heavy yet full of potential, and she nodded, encouraging him without interrupting, giving him the courage to continue, and he spoke of Emma's upcoming departure, the sudden news that she would be leaving the city, and the panic and ache it brought to his heart, the fear of losing someone who had become so central to his thoughts, his dreams, and his sense of possibility, and Clara felt the pain of his confession ripple through her, the ache of separation, of longing, of moments and connections that might never fully materialize, and she reached out, lightly placing a hand on his arm, her touch grounding, reassuring, silently telling him that the intensity of what he felt mattered, that it was real, and that it was okay to feel heartbreak even while feeling love. And Daniel's voice trembled as he admitted that he didn't know what to do, that he wanted to hold on, to make memories, to express the depth of his feelings before it was too late, but the circumstances felt beyond his control, and Clara listened closely, feeling every tremor in his words, every unspoken fear, every thread of hope, because she understood that young love, even in its fleeting form, carried lessons about courage, vulnerability, and the preciousness of the heart, and she encouraged him gently, saying that even in separation, emotions could be cherished, that memories could be kept alive, and that the act of loving fully, even with uncertainty, was a brave and meaningful choice. And Daniel's eyes glimmered with tears, reflecting both the pain of the moment and the relief of having someone fully witness it, and he spoke of the dreams he had built around Emma, the small plans, the imagined conversations, the fleeting moments of happiness he had held close in his mind, and Clara felt a tender ache for him, remembering her own experiences of love, longing, and the bittersweet ache of impermanence, and she reached out again, placing both hands gently on his shoulders, grounding him in the present, reminding him that while circumstances might be unpredictable, the feelings themselves were valid and beautiful. And Daniel exhaled shakily, allowing a single tear to roll down his cheek, and Clara wiped it gently, whispering words of comfort, reminding him that vulnerability was strength, and that he was brave for allowing himself to feel so deeply. And Daniel leaned forward slightly, resting his forehead against his clasped hands, overwhelmed by the rush of emotions, the intensity of love, longing, and fear swirling together, and Clara sat silently, letting him process, letting the room hold their emotions, letting the night stretch with the weight and beauty of what had been revealed. And then he lifted his gaze, eyes meeting hers with a fragile smile, and he whispered, "I don't know if I'll see her again, and it scares me." And Clara felt the truth in his words, the raw ache of uncertainty, and she held his gaze, her own eyes soft, offering understanding, love, and reassurance. And she told him that even if they were apart, the moments they shared, the feelings he had experienced, would always remain part of him, shaping his heart, his growth, his capacity to love. And Daniel nodded slowly, taking in her words, feeling a mixture of relief and lingering anxiety, the tension of unspoken questions still present but eased by the knowledge that he was not alone. And then he spoke again, voice quieter, more contemplative, "I just wish I could tell her everything, make her understand how much she means to me." And Clara felt the depth of his longing, the intensity of first love, and she encouraged him gently to express himself, to seize whatever moments remained, to love fully, even if it hurt, because life's greatest lessons and most profound joys often came through emotional courage and vulnerability. And Daniel's chest rose and fell as he absorbed her words, the fear and hope intermingling, the ache of separation softened slightly by understanding and love. And he began to reflect aloud on how Emma had changed him, how she had inspired him to see beauty in small moments, to appreciate connection, to recognize the power of intimacy and shared emotion. And Clara listened, captivated, feeling both pride and tenderness for the young man she had raised, who was learning about the depth and complexity of the heart through experience. And Daniel continued, speaking of moments that had stayed with him, small acts of kindness, shared laughter, quiet glances, moments that seemed ordinary at the time but now held profound significance. and Clara realized how deeply he had internalized these experiences, how much they had shaped him, and she felt a deep sense of respect and love for his honesty and emotional maturity. And then he admitted, with a quivering voice, that he feared letting go, feared the permanence of absence, feared the ache of longing that would follow, and Clara felt the ache alongside him, understanding the universal pain of love and loss, and she reminded him softly that even when people are apart, the emotions they share, the memories, and the growth that comes from connection are never truly lost. And Daniel exhaled, a long shuddering breath, feeling slightly lighter but still carrying the beautiful weight of his feelings, and he leaned back on the couch, eyes glistening, looking at Clara with gratitude and vulnerability, and she responded with a gentle smile, offering warmth, understanding, and love without judgment, creating a space where he could process, reflect, and heal. And Daniel spoke again, voice barely above a whisper, "I just hope she knows, someday, how much she means to me." And Clara felt the depth of longing in that simple sentence, recognizing in it the universal ache of unspoken love, the hope that the heart's expression could reach across distance, circumstance, and uncertainty, and she whispered words of comfort, reminding him that feelings shared honestly, even if not fully received or returned immediately, still carry value, meaning, and transformative power. And Daniel nodded slowly, absorbing her words, feeling the tension in his chest ease slightly, the ache softened by the acknowledgement that love itself is its own reward, its own lesson, and that expressing it, even in the face of fear or loss, is a brave and meaningful act. And he finally allowed himself a small, shaky smile, the first hint of relief crossing his features, and Clara felt her own heart swell with love, pride, and empathy, recognizing the courage it had taken for him to reach this moment, to voice his truth, to confront both hope and fear in equal measure. And the night seemed to hold its breath with them, the quiet of the house amplifying the emotional resonance, the soft ticking of the clock marking the passage of a moment that would linger long in memory. And Daniel spoke again, softly, almost to himself, "I feel like I've carried this alone for too long." And Clara's chest tightened, understanding the isolation that comes with unspoken emotions, the relief of finally sharing them. And she reassured him, her voice gentle, full of love, "You're not alone anymore. I'm here, always." And Daniel exhaled, letting the weight of secrecy lift slightly, the tension of uncertainty loosen, the ache of longing still present but lessened by connection, and he leaned back, resting for a moment, eyes glimmering with gratitude and release. And Clara felt the room pulse with quiet intimacy, the kind that comes from shared vulnerability, emotional honesty, and the presence of someone who listens without judgment. And then he spoke again, this time with a slightly steadier voice, "Imam, thank you for understanding, for listening, for being here." And Clara felt tears prick at her own eyes, moved by the power of this simple act, the profoundness of empathy, the strength of love, and she responded softly, "Always, Daniel. Always." And the words hung in the air, carrying warmth, reassurance, and the quiet promise of support. And Daniel smiled again, this time more genuine, a small light flickering in his eyes, and Clara felt the tension of the night dissolve slightly, replaced by the quiet beauty of shared emotion. And Daniel reflected on the lessons of this moment, the realization that vulnerability is strength, that expressing love and fear is brave, and that connections, even when complicated, fragile, or temporary, are invaluable. And Clara nodded silently, feeling the truth of those reflections, witnessing growth, courage, and emotional depth in her son. And she understood that this midnight conversation, born from a simple knock, had transformed the night, deepened their bond, and created a lasting memory that would linger in their hearts, shaping their understanding, trust, and love for each other in ways small and profound. And Daniel finally leaned back fully, eyes soft, breathing steady, and Clara smiled, offering warmth, empathy, and silent acknowledgement, knowing that the night had carried them through fear, longing, hope, and love, and left them both forever changed, hearts aligned in quiet understanding. And as the clock ticked toward the early hours, the living room held a sacred calm, the tension replaced by intimacy, the ache softened by connection, the love affirmed in the quiet words exchanged. And Daniel, for the first time that night, felt a fragile but real sense of peace, knowing that his feelings were valid, witnessed, and held with care. And Clara felt the enduring beauty of being present, of listening, of loving unconditionally, as mother and son sat together, the night carrying their emotions gently, The shadows and lamplight embracing them, the world outside forgotten, and the bond between them solidified, strengthened, and illuminated by the courage, honesty, and love that had filled the living room from the first knock at midnight to the quiet calm that followed, a testament to the power of truth, emotional bravery, and the unbreakable connection of family. As Daniel finally exhaled fully, a soft smile lingering, and Clara knew in her heart that this night, this conversation, this act of sharing, would be remembered forever, a turning point of growth, understanding, and love, and the warmth between them carried them gently into the early morning, hearts fuller, spirits lighter, and the promise of connection enduring beyond the shadows, the lamp glow, and the ticking clock.